It all started one lazy afternoon when I noticed my neighbor, Emily, standing on the edge of her yard with a mischievous smile and a glint of excitement in her eyes. Emily was the type of neighbor who always had something interesting going on, whether it was her quirky garden projects or the way she trained her golden retriever, Max, to perform incredible tricks. But that day, she had a strange request that I wasn't quite prepared for. "Hey, you've got to try this with your dog, buddy," she called out, waving me over to the fence. "It's something I've been working on with Max, and I think Buddy would love it." Curiosity got the better of me, and I walked over with Buddy trailing behind, his tail wagging happily. Emily had a small tripod set up with her phone already recording. She explained that she'd been experimenting with a fun new game that was part challenge, part bonding exercise, and she swore it would go viral if we captured it on camera. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and Buddy, being the playful Labrador he is, seemed eager to join in. "What exactly are we doing?" I asked, a mix of excitement and hesitation in my voice. Emily grinned and leaned in as if revealing a secret. "Trust me, it's harmless and hilarious. Max nailed it yesterday. Let's see if Buddy can outshine him." She handed me a small bag filled with what looked like ordinary treats. But there was a twist. Before I could fully understand what was happening, Emily positioned the camera, gave a quick countdown, and told me to follow her lead. The next few moments were a blur of laughter, unexpected surprises, and a challenge that took an unpredictable turn. As Buddy tilted his head in confusion and Max barked encouragingly from the sidelines, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was going to end in a way neither of us expected. What started as a simple game was quickly becoming something much more unique. And then it happened. Just as Emily pressed the button to stop recording, Buddy did something so unexpected it left both of us speechless. What was meant to be a fun, lighthearted moment suddenly felt like the start of a story we'd never forget. Emily's jaw dropped, and for a moment neither of us said a word. Buddy stood there, wagging his tail proudly, as if he had just solved a great mystery. Whatever he had done, it clearly wasn't part of Emily's plan. "Did you see that?" Emily whispered, her voice barely audible over Max's excited barking. I nodded, still trying to process what had just happened. "I swear Max has never done anything like that before," she added, her tone somewhere between astonishment and curiosity. I bent down to give Buddy a reassuring pat, but even he seemed different, almost as if he knew something we didn't. Emily quickly reviewed the footage on her phone, her fingers trembling slightly. Her expression shifted from shock to a mix of intrigue and excitement. This, this is incredible," she said, her eyes lighting up. "We have to keep going." "What do you mean, keep going?" I asked, suddenly feeling a knot of unease in my stomach. "Emily, what's in those treats?" Her smile faltered for just a moment before she waved off my question. "Relax, they're just regular training treats. Nothing weird, I promise. But whatever just happened, we have to figure out why. Trust me, this could be huge." I wasn't entirely convinced, but there was something about her excitement that made it hard to say no. Emily had always been a little unconventional, but she wasn't reckless. At least, I didn't think she was. Before I could protest further, she reset the camera, this time with Max and Buddy sitting side by side. "Okay, let's try it again. Maybe there's something about them working together," she said, almost to herself. As she gave the first command, I couldn't help but wonder what we were about to uncover. Whatever this was, it felt bigger than a simple game. But was that a good thing, or something we'd regret? As Emily set up the camera again, I glanced over at Buddy, who was sitting calmly beside Max. His usual playful energy seemed to have faded slightly, replaced by an almost eerie stillness. I shook off the thought, telling myself that I was just being paranoid. After all, dogs were unpredictable creatures. But something about the situation felt off, like we were on the brink of something we couldn't fully understand. Emily gave another excited grin, but there was a flicker of uncertainty behind her eyes. This time, we'll see how they work together. Max and Buddy are getting along so well. They might be able to do more than we think. I nodded, but my mind kept drifting back to the moment Buddy had done something unexpected. What exactly had he done? It was too quick to analyze. Was it the treats? Or was something else at play here? The camera began rolling again, and Emily gave her familiar command. Max responded immediately, following the instructions with precision. But when it was Buddy's turn, something strange happened. He froze, his eyes locked onto the camera, and for a split second, I thought I saw a flicker of recognition. Not the kind of recognition you'd expect from a dog. This was different. It was almost as if he knew we were watching him, that this moment was more significant than just a simple game. Buddy, come on, what's going on? I said, trying to get his attention, but he didn't budge. Emily's voice became more insistent, urging Buddy to perform the trick, but he remained still. She crouched down next to him, her face filled with frustration. What's wrong with him? She muttered, but I could see the glimmer of excitement in her eyes. Whatever was happening, she wasn't backing down. Max, sensing the tension, began to bark loudly, almost as if he was trying to break the silence. I bent down to Buddy, gently calling his name. But as my hand reached out to touch him, something even stranger happened. Buddy, who had always been so affectionate and trusting, suddenly jerked away, his body tense, his eyes wide and unblinking. He seemed afraid. Buddy? I asked softly, but there was no response. Emily watched in stunned silence as I tried to coax him back. This wasn't just about training anymore. It felt like there was something deeper, something hidden that we weren't meant to uncover. Maybe we should stop for now, I suggested, my voice wavering with doubt. But Emily wasn't ready to give up. No, we're so close. Something's happening. We need to figure out what it is. As the tension thickened in the air, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were messing with something we didn't understand. And whatever it was starting to feel less like a fun game and more like a dangerous mystery we might not be able to control. I tried to reach out to Buddy again, but he was pulling away now, his body stiff with fear. Something was wrong, and deep down I knew it. His usual playful demeanor had vanished, replaced by a sort of unease that I couldn't explain. The way he looked at me was unsettling, as if he wasn't seeing me at all, but something, or someone, else. Emily, I said, my voice shaky, I think we've gone too far. Buddy's not himself. She glanced over at me, her eyes wide, but she was still determined. No, we're on the verge of something amazing. Don't you feel it? This could change everything. She was speaking faster now, almost as if she were trying to convince herself as much as me. She was pushing me, pushing Buddy, and I wasn't sure how much more either of us could take. Buddy's tail had stopped wagging. He wasn't barking. He was just staring, locked onto the camera like it held some kind of power over him. I could feel my heart rate quicken as the air around us seemed to grow heavier, almost suffocating. Max had stopped barking too, now lying motionless beside Emily, his usually playful energy absent. Something was off, and it wasn't just Buddy's behavior. The whole atmosphere felt different. It felt like we were being watched, as if there was something hidden in the shadows of the yard, waiting for the right moment to strike. I couldn't explain it, but my gut was telling me that whatever was happening, we shouldn't be messing with it. Emily, I'm serious, I said, my voice growing firmer. Let's stop. There's something wrong with this whole thing. This game, whatever it is, it's not normal. Emily hesitated for a moment, her hand still clutching the camera, but then she gave a nervous laugh. "You're being dramatic. It's just a trick. We'll figure it out." But even as she spoke, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. She was questioning herself too now, but she didn't want to stop. She couldn't. Just then, Buddy did something that made my blood run cold. He let out a low growl, one I had never heard before. It was a sound so unlike him, so primal, that it sent a chill down my spine. His eyes never left the camera, but his growl grew louder, deeper, almost as if he was warning us, or maybe protecting us. "Buddy, what's wrong?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. But the moment the words left my mouth, a strange crackling noise filled the air, like static from an old radio, and the camera began to flicker. The lights in the yard seemed to dim, and for a moment, everything went still. The ground beneath our feet seemed to shift, and that was when I realized this wasn't just some game anymore. Whatever we had triggered, it was real, and it was getting worse. The static crackling grew louder, a strange hum filling the air as the camera flickered again. I glanced at Emily, whose face had gone pale, her grip on the camera trembling. "What the hell is happening?" I muttered under my breath. I was barely able to hear myself over the sudden rush of noise, like the air around us was vibrating. It felt like something was closing in. But from where? Buddy, still staring at the camera, let out a deep, guttural growl. This time, it was different. His fur was standing on end, and his body seemed to tremble, not from fear, but from some unseen force pulling at him. His eyes darted around the yard as if he were seeing something we couldn't. Max, who had been lying still just moments before, suddenly leapt up, his barking turning frantic. "Emily!" I shouted, but she was frozen, her gaze locked on Buddy. The tension in the air was thick, palpable, and it felt like something terrible was about to unfold. My hands were shaking, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from Buddy. I reached out to him, but before I could touch him, he darted away, running toward the far corner of the yard where the shadows seemed to swallow him whole. "Buddy, wait!" I called, but he didn't stop. He disappeared into the darkened corner of the yard just as the camera started to flicker violently, as if something was trying to block it out. The ground beneath us rumbled again, stronger this time, and I felt my heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't just static anymore. It was something physical, something moving beneath the earth. I grabbed Emily's arm, shaking her. "We need to go inside, now." But she barely reacted, her eyes wide, unblinking, as if she were in a trance. "Emily!" I shouted, more forcefully this time. She snapped out of it, but when she looked at me, her face was drained of color. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice low and barely a whisper. I nodded, heart racing. "The ground. It's like something's under it," she said, her words barely making sense. Suddenly, the camera's screen flickered one last time before it went completely black, leaving us in eerie silence. The hum that had been surrounding us cut off abruptly, and for a moment there was no sound at all. That's when we heard it. A faint, distant growl. Not from Buddy. This was different, deeper, more menacing. It came from somewhere beyond the corner of the yard, but it wasn't just one growl. It was a chorus of growls, a low rumble like the growls of several animals, wild, untamed. My breath caught in my throat. Is that from Buddy?" I asked, my voice trembling. Emily shook her head, her eyes wide with terror. "No, that's not him." Her words sent a chill down my spine, and we both stood frozen, listening. The growls grew louder, more distinct, and then, through the flickering shadows, we saw them. Figures, dark shapes moving slowly across the yard, barely visible in the dim light. They were creeping closer, and I could feel the air grow heavier as they neared. My body froze, the hairs on my neck standing up. I had no idea what these things were, but I knew, without a doubt, that we were no longer dealing with a game. We were dealing with something far more dangerous, something we had never expected. Emily, what have we done? I whispered, my voice cracking under the weight of fear. The figures in the shadows were moving faster now, closing in on us, and I realized then that this wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't just some trick. We had unleashed something, and it wasn't going to let us go. The dark figures moved closer, their forms becoming more distinct in the dim light. I could hear the growls now, almost like a warning, each one sending a jolt of panic through me. I grabbed Emily by the arm and pulled her toward the house, my heart racing. But before we could take more than a few steps, a loud crash echoed through the yard, and the ground shook violently beneath our feet. I turned around, my eyes wide with terror, just in time to see Buddy emerge from the shadows. But he wasn't alone. Behind him, a pack of creatures, some resembling dogs, others looking almost human, poured out of the dark corner of the yard. Their eyes glowed eerily in the darkness, and they moved with unsettling precision. It was as if they had been waiting for this moment, waiting for Buddy to lead them. The sight was surreal, terrifying beyond anything I had ever imagined. "Buddy!" I shouted, but he didn't even look at me. He was standing in front of the pack, his head low, his body stiff with power. He was different now, no longer the playful dog I knew. He was a leader, and those creatures were his followers. It felt as if they had somehow crossed into our world from another place, something beyond the realm of explanation. Emily stood frozen beside me, her face pale. What? What are they? Her voice trembled. I don't know, I whispered, stepping backward slowly, the weight of the situation sinking in. But we need to get out of here. Before we could move, the creatures advanced, and Buddy let out a low, deep growl. Suddenly, they stopped in their tracks, as if they were waiting for something. That's when I realized there was something else, something worse, a presence behind the pack, something far larger, darker. It loomed in the shadows, and its eyes gleamed with an unnatural, malevolent light. A cold wind blew through the yard, and I could feel the temperature drop, the air growing thick with dread. I turned to Emily, but before I could speak, Buddy did something unexpected. He turned toward the pack, nodded once, and then, as if giving us one last chance, he sprinted toward the shadows, disappearing into the darkness. The creatures hesitated for a moment, as if confused. Then they all turned, following him without a sound, fading into the night. Emily and I stood there, breathless, watching the shadows swallow them whole. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, just as I thought we were safe, the camera, which had fallen to the ground during the chaos, suddenly flickered back on. The screen was filled with static for a second, but then a clear image appeared. It was Buddy standing in the center of the yard, staring directly at the camera. His eyes were different, cold, unblinking, and somehow knowing. A single message flashed across the screen. "This is just the beginning." The camera went black again, leaving us in a suffocating silence. "Emily, we have to leave. Now," I said, but deep down I knew it was too late. I stood there, staring at the darkened screen of the camera, my heart pounding in my chest. This is just the beginning. The words echoed in my mind, the weight of them settling deep in my bones. Whatever we had awakened, whatever Buddy had become, it wasn't over, and it felt like it would never truly be over. Emily was still standing beside me, her eyes locked on the camera. She seemed to be processing everything, but I could see the fear in her eyes. The fear I felt too. We hadn't just stumbled onto some strange game. We had crossed a line, and now we were trapped in a world where the rules didn't make sense. "We need to destroy that footage," Emily finally said, her voice trembling. "No one can ever know what happened here." I nodded, feeling the same way. We had no idea what kind of power we had tapped into. We had no idea what Buddy had become, or what those creatures truly were. But I knew one thing for certain. It wasn't something the world was ready to understand, and it wasn't something we could explain. As we moved to gather the camera and shut it off for good, I heard a distant sound, a low, eerie howl. It sent a chill down my spine. The creatures weren't gone. They were still out there, waiting, and Buddy had led them into our world. We couldn't undo what had happened. The game had gone too far. But as Emily and I looked at each other, the realization dawned on both of us. The mystery of Buddy, the creatures, the message, it was all part of something bigger, something we weren't ready to face. And as the howls grew louder in the distance, we both knew our lives would never be the same again.